Something extraordinary just happened in federal court 1 minute ago, and it's sending shockwaves through both the legal system and the political establishment in ways that no one anticipated. A close Trump ally, someone who has been at the center of multiple controversies, but always seemed beyond the reach of prosecution, has just been arrested on charges that go far beyond what investigators initially pursued. And this isn't just another indictment that will dominate headlines for a news cycle before fading into the background noise of our politically chaotic era. This is a development that threatens to unravel carefully constructed legal defenses, expose networks of coordination that were supposed to remain hidden, and potentially implicate figures far more prominent than the person who was just taken into custody. Stay until the end, because what's unfolding here could fundamentally reshape multiple ongoing investigations, create new legal jeopardy for Trump himself, and test whether anyone in America's political elite can truly be held accountable when their actions cross legal lines. And if you want to understand the cascading implications of this arrest and why prosecutors are calling it a breakthrough moment, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss analysis of the legal and political earthquakes that define our democracy. So imagine this scene early this morning at a private residence in South Florida. Federal agents executing an arrest warrant, reading Miranda rights, and escorting a figure who just days ago was appearing on conservative media defending Trump and attacking prosecutors. And the charges being announced simultaneously in a federal courthouse don't match what legal observers were expecting. Because for months, speculation focused on potential financial crimes, campaign finance violations, or obstruction charges related to classified documents. But what prosecutors have actually charged is something different and potentially far more serious. Conspiracy to obstruct justice, witness tampering, and making false statements to federal investigators, and the immediate reaction among Trump's legal team, among Republican lawmakers who have been defending this ally, and among the broader conservative media ecosystem that has been portraying these investigations as political persecution, is something between shock and panic. Because this arrest doesn't fit the narrative they've been constructing. It's not a process crime that can be dismissed as prosecutorial overreach. It's allegations of active obstruction, of coordinated efforts to hide evidence and influence testimony, and of a pattern of deception that undermines every defense Trump's circle has been advancing. And that's where the crisis begins. Because this ally isn't just another peripheral figure in Trump's orbit. This is someone with intimate knowledge of multiple investigations, someone who has been present at key meetings and conversations, someone who federal prosecutors have been trying to flip for months. And the fact that they're now being arrested rather than cooperating suggests that negotiations broke down, that prosecutors have evidence they believe is strong enough to convict, and that they're prepared to use this prosecution as leverage to extract cooperation that could reach much higher up the chain. Now, to understand why this arrest is triggering a crisis that no one saw coming, you need to understand the legal context and what these specific charges reveal about where investigations are heading. Because obstruction of justice isn't a standalone crime that exists in isolation. It's a charge that implies there's an underlying proceeding being obstructed, underlying evidence being concealed, and underlying testimony being influenced. And in this case, the obstruction charges relate to at least 3 different ongoing investigations: the classified documents probe, the January 6th investigation, and potentially the Georgia election interference case. What prosecutors are alleging, based on the public portions of the charging documents, is that this Trump ally engaged in a coordinated effort to prevent investigators from obtaining evidence to influence potential witnesses about what they should tell grand juries, and to create false paper trails that would mislead prosecutors about what actually occurred. And these aren't allegations based on inference or circumstantial evidence. The charging documents reference specific communications, specific meetings, and specific acts that prosecutors can prove through documents, recordings, and testimony from witnesses who have already cooperated. And here's why this matters beyond this individual prosecution. Because obstruction charges create what lawyers call a conspiracy ladder. Once you prove that multiple people coordinated to obstruct justice, you can charge a conspiracy. And conspiracies have legal advantages for prosecutors. They allow evidence from one co-conspirator to be used against others. They permit charges against everyone involved in the scheme, regardless of who took specific actions. And they create pressure on lower-level participants to cooperate against higher-level figures in exchange for reduced sentences. And that's exactly what prosecutors appear to be building here. They're not just trying to convict this one ally. They're constructing a framework that allows them to pursue everyone involved in the obstruction scheme, potentially including lawyers who advised on document retention, political operatives who coordinated witness testimony, and ultimately Trump himself, if evidence shows he directed or approved these efforts. And what makes this case particularly damaging for Trump's broader legal strategy is that the obstruction charges undermine the defenses his team has been advancing in other cases. If prosecutors can prove that Trump's circle actively obstructed investigations, it becomes much harder to argue that they're victims of a political witch hunt. If witnesses were tampered with, it casts doubt on testimony that Trump's team has relied on. And if evidence was concealed, it suggests consciousness of guilt rather than innocent explanations. Now let's talk about the political earthquake this arrest just triggered, because the legal implications are only part of the story. This is happening at a moment when Trump is dominating Republican primary polling, when his legal troubles have actually strengthened his position with GOP-based voters, and when the conventional wisdom suggested that prosecutions would rally Republicans around him rather than weakening his political position. And this arrest challenges that conventional wisdom in several ways. First, it provides concrete evidence that people in Trump's inner circle committed serious crimes, not process violations or technical infractions, but deliberate obstruction and witness tampering. That makes it harder for Republican lawmakers to dismiss all Trump-related investigations as political persecution. Second, it creates the possibility of cooperation that could directly implicate Trump himself. And third, it demonstrates that prosecutors are willing to pursue prominent figures despite political blowback. But the political crisis goes deeper because what this arrest exposes is a pattern of behavior that Republicans have been trying to downplay or rationalize. It's one thing to defend Trump by saying he had sincere legal disagreements about classified document retention. It's much harder to defend systematic obstruction of federal investigations, especially when that obstruction involves tampering with witnesses and destroying evidence. And Republican lawmakers are now facing impossible choices. If they defend this arrested ally, they're defending obstruction of justice and witness tampering. If they distance themselves, they risk Trump's wrath and backlash from base voters. And if they stay silent, they look weak and unprincipled. And no, this isn't the first time Republicans have faced this dilemma during the Trump era. But this moment is different because the charges are unambiguous. The evidence appears strong, and the implications potentially extend to Trump himself, because Republican senators and representatives are being asked to rationalize not just different legal opinions, but active obstruction through witness tampering and evidence destruction. And that's a much harder sell. And this creates a crisis for Republican leadership that extends beyond this single prosecution. Because if they continue defending Trump and his allies, regardless of what evidence emerges, they're essentially arguing that Republicans should be above the law. But if they start acknowledging that some conduct crossed legal lines, they open the door to questions about Trump's own culpability. Meanwhile, Democrats face their own calculations. Biden has tried to maintain distance from Justice Department prosecutions, emphasizing that investigations are independent. But this arrest will inevitably be drawn into partisan politics, with Democrats arguing it validates concerns about Trump's lawlessness, and Republicans claiming it proves weaponization of justice. And the challenge for Democrats is to hold Trump accountable without appearing to politicize prosecutions. Because if these cases are perceived as partisan rather than legitimate law enforcement, it undermines their impact. Convictions that look like political persecution don't damage Trump with his base, and might even strengthen him. Now, let's talk about what everyone in Trump's orbit is thinking about right now, but nobody wants to say publicly: the possibility that this arrested ally will flip, will cooperate with prosecutors, and will provide testimony that directly implicates Trump in obstruction of justice, because that's what this arrest is really designed to accomplish. Prosecutors aren't primarily interested in convicting this one individual. They want what this person knows about Trump's role in obstructing investigations, and the pressure to cooperate is enormous. Federal obstruction and witness tampering charges carry significant prison time. This ally is facing years in federal custody if convicted. They have family, financial obligations, and a future to consider. And prosecutors have undoubtedly made clear that cooperation could result in dramatically reduced charges, minimal or no prison time, and protection for family members who might otherwise face legal jeopardy. But cooperation also carries massive risks. Trump has a well-documented history of attacking anyone who testifies against him, of using his political platform to destroy the credibility of cooperating witnesses, and of signaling through public statements and pardon hints that loyalty will be rewarded and betrayal will be punished. Any Trump ally considering cooperation knows they'll be labeled a traitor, subjected to intense public attacks, potentially blacklisted from conservative politics, and marked as an enemy of the movement. And that creates a genuine dilemma. Cooperate and face Trump's wrath, but potentially avoid prison. Stay loyal and hope for a pardon if Trump wins in 2024, but risk conviction and years in federal custody if he doesn't. And there's no clear right answer, because it depends on calculations about Trump's electoral prospects, about whether he would actually follow through on pardon promises, and about whether you can survive the costs of being labeled a turncoat. And prosecutors understand these dynamics. They've structured their case to maximize pressure while minimizing the costs of cooperation. They've probably assured this ally that cooperation would be kept confidential as long as possible. That testimony could be used to build cases without requiring public trial testimony, and that witness protection would be available if needed. But here's where it gets really interesting, because if this ally does cooperate, the implications cascade far beyond this individual case. Testimony about Trump's role in obstruction could be used in the classified documents case, in the January 6th investigation, and potentially in state-level prosecutions. It could expose coordination among Trump's legal team that violates attorney-client privilege if lawyers were advising on criminal conduct. And it could create a domino effect where other Trump allies conclude that cooperation is their best option. And that's the nightmare scenario that Trump's legal team is now confronting. Not one cooperating witness who can be attacked and discredited, but a cascade of cooperation where multiple insiders provide corroborating testimony about obstruction schemes, about Trump's direct involvement, and about systematic efforts to hide evidence. Because once that process starts, it becomes very difficult to stop. Now let's examine how this arrest fits into the broader network of investigations circling Trump. because understanding the connections is essential to grasping why this moment represents such a significant crisis. Because federal prosecutors aren't conducting isolated investigations, they're pursuing multiple related probes that share witnesses, overlap in subject matter, and potentially build toward a comprehensive case against Trump himself. The classified documents investigation is looking at whether Trump illegally retained national defense information and obstructed efforts to recover it. The January 6th investigation is examining Trump's role in efforts to overturn the 2020 election and whether he obstructed congressional proceedings. The Georgia case is focused on Trump's pressure on state officials to change election results, and there are parallel investigations into Trump Organization finances and potential campaign finance violations. And this arrested ally has connections to at least 3 of these investigations. They were involved in efforts around classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. They participated in conversations about January 6th planning, and they have knowledge of coordination between Trump's legal team and political operatives, which means their potential testimony could impact multiple cases simultaneously. And that's what prosecutors are really after. Not just evidence in one case, but testimony that ties together separate investigations that shows patterns of conduct rather than isolated incidents, and that demonstrates consciousness of guilt through systematic obstruction efforts. Because if prosecutors can prove that Trump and his allies obstructed the documents investigation, it suggests the underlying retention was knowing and willful. If they can prove obstruction of the January 6th investigation, it suggests Trump knew his conduct was problematic. And this is where the crisis becomes truly existential for Trump, because he's been managing these investigations by keeping them separate, by arguing that each case is based on flawed legal theories, and by preventing any single investigation from obtaining the complete picture. But if this ally cooperates and provides testimony that connects the dots, that strategy collapses. Suddenly, prosecutors in different jurisdictions can share information, can build corroborating cases, and can present juries with comprehensive evidence of patterns rather than isolated incidents. Suddenly, defenses that worked when investigations were siloed become untenable when the full scope is visible. And suddenly, the legal jeopardy multiplies because convictions in one case make convictions in other cases more likely. And no, this isn't prosecutors unfairly piling on. This is how complex criminal investigations work. When defendants engage in related conduct across multiple jurisdictions, you build cases methodically, you follow evidence wherever it leads, and you use cooperation from insiders to construct comprehensive prosecutions. Now let's talk about the constitutional crisis that's lurking beneath the surface of this legal drama. Because what happens if prosecutors build overwhelming cases against Trump, but he wins the 2024 election before trials conclude? This isn't hypothetical anymore. It's a plausible outcome that would create unprecedented tensions between the criminal justice system and democratic governance, because the Constitution doesn't clearly address whether a sitting president can be criminally prosecuted. Justice Department policy says you can't indict a sitting president based on concerns about interference with executive functions. But that's department policy, not constitutional law. And it's never been tested with a president who was under indictment before taking office. So what happens? Do federal prosecutors drop cases because Trump won an election? That would suggest political success places you above the law. Do they continue prosecutions despite Trump being president? That creates constitutional conflicts. Do they pause cases until after Trump's term? That could mean justice delayed by 4 or 8 years. And there are no good answers. Every option creates serious problems for either democratic accountability or constitutional governance. And the arrest that happened this morning makes these scenarios more urgent. Because if this ally cooperates, if prosecutions against Trump accelerate, and if indictments come while he's campaigning, we could face the unprecedented situation of voters knowingly electing someone under multiple criminal indictments. And no, you can't resolve this by saying voters shouldn't elect someone facing serious charges. In a democracy, voters get to make those decisions. But you also can't resolve it by saying electoral success should override criminal prosecution. That creates a system where political power provides immunity. So we're heading toward a constitutional crisis that will test whether American institutions can handle scenarios the framers never imagined. A former president running while facing multiple prosecutions. Voters potentially choosing someone convicted of crimes. A president-elect who might try to pardon himself. Courts having to decide whether they can compel a sitting president to stand trial. So where does this leave us? What should we expect in the coming days and weeks as this crisis unfolds? And what are the implications for American politics and the rule of law? Well, immediately, expect Trump to attack this arrest viciously. He'll call it a witch hunt, claim his ally is being persecuted for loyalty, and argue that the entire justice system is corrupt. And that message will resonate with his base, will be amplified across conservative media, and will be embraced by Republican lawmakers who have tied their political futures to Trump. Expect defense lawyers for this arrested ally to fight back hard, arguing proctorial overreach and trying to frame their client as a victim. But also expect quiet conversations about cooperation, about whether fighting makes sense given the evidence, and about what kind of deal might be available. Expect other Trump allies facing legal jeopardy to recalculate their own situations. If this ally cooperates, does that change the landscape for everyone else? Does it make cooperation more or less attractive? And expect prosecutors to use this arrest to create exactly that pressure to make everyone in Trump's orbit wonder who might flip and what they might say, and expect the political implications to unfold over weeks and months. This arrest is a data point that will be integrated into broader narratives about Trump, about Republican Party complicity, about justice system integrity. And how those narratives develop will depend on evidence that emerges on whether cooperation materializes and on political choices that lawmakers make. Longer term, this arrest represents a test of whether accountability is possible in our current political environment. Can prosecutors successfully pursue powerful political figures despite intense partisan backlash? Can courts fairly adjudicate cases when defendants have massive platforms to attack the judicial process? Can juries render verdicts based on evidence when they're being told that prosecutions are political persecution? And we don't know the answers yet. We're discovering them in real time through cases like this, through the decisions that prosecutors make, through the choices that potential cooperators face, and through the political responses that either support or undermine the rule of law. Because what's really at stake here goes beyond Donald Trump, or this particular ally, or these specific charges. What's at stake is whether we maintain a system where powerful people can be held accountable when they break the law, or whether we're transitioning to a system where political power provides effective immunity from legal consequences. And that question will be answered not just by what happens in courtrooms, but by how American voters respond, by whether Republican lawmakers find the courage to prioritize rule of law over partisan loyalty, and by whether our institutions can withstand the extraordinary pressures being placed on them. So stay informed. Pay attention not just to the legal maneuvering, but to the deeper questions about accountability and governance that are being tested. Understand that this arrest is significant not just because of who was charged, but because of what it reveals about how our system handles powerful people who might have broken the law. And if you want to follow this story as it develops if you want analysis that goes beyond the partisan spin and explores what's really at stake. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel and hit that notification bell, because these are the moments that determine whether we're a nation of laws or a nation where political power creates immunity from accountability. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one, as this unprecedented crisis continues to unfold.